Thank you, Mr. Adams. Ms. Conron is now recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Green, Ranking Member Barr, and Chairwoman Waters, and members of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about housing lending and the LGBTQ+ community, a population of 11 million LGBT adults and 2 million LGBT youth. My name is Kerith Conron. I'm the research director for UCLA School of Law's Williams Institute, a center that focuses on the impact of law and public policy on LGBTQ+ people. As a social epidemiologist, my research examines sexual orientation and gender identity-based differences in socioeconomic status, contributors to those differences, and the consequences of such differences. So a large body of research has found that LGBT people experience discrimination and harassment in housing, employment, and other domains of life. LGBT adults are twice as likely as non-LGBT people to report ever having been prevented from moving into or buying a house or apartment by a landlord or realtor. Controlled experiments funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development found that same-sex couples and transgender individuals were less likely to receive responses about rental units and were shown fewer rental units than others. LGBT adults are more likely to report being fired or denied a job than non-LGBT adults. They're also more likely to report being denied a promotion or receiving a negative job evaluation than non-LGBT adults. And an extensive body of research shows that LGBT students, both in secondary school and emerging body of literature about discrimination and harassment among college students, shows that LGBT students are more likely to be bullied and otherwise victimized than non-LGBT students. And as Dr. Sun will describe, same-sex mortgage applicants are less likely to be approved than different-sex loan applicants. Discrimination contributes to homelessness and housing instability and lower rates of home ownership among LGBTQ+ people. These patterns have been observed in convenient sample studies for quite some time, but we're now at the point in the field where we have population-based representative studies that show the same patterns. We have experimental designs that show the same patterns, and we also have records from administrative complaints. So these patterns of discrimination are undeniable. In terms of homelessness and some statistics, LGBT youth and transgender adults are far more likely to be homeless and unstably housed than non-LGBT youth and adults. Recent analyses conducted with the TransPop data funded by NIH found that 30% of transgender adults reported that they had to move twice or more often in the prior 2 years compared to only 11% of cisgender, and when I say that I mean non-transgender people. LGBT adults are less likely to own homes and are more likely to rent than non-LGBT adults. We conducted analyses of data collected by the CDC across 35 states in preparation for this hearing and found that half of LGBT adults on average own their homes compared to about 70% of non-LGBT adults. Rates of home ownership are even lower for transgender adults at about 25%. Homelessness, housing instability, they dramatically increase the risk of violence victimization, exploitation, and poor health, and there's a literature to support this. What I've shared with you today relies upon the best available data, but gaps in existing federal data systems need to be filled. If questions about sexual orientation, gender identity, and assigned sex at birth were included in the American Community Survey and the American Housing Survey, then the committee could request information about home ownership, mortgages, housing and rental costs, and housing quality for LGBTQ+ communities directly from the Census Bureau. Similarly, if the Survey of Consumer Finances conducted by the Federal Reserve Board included similar questions, then information about credit usage and refusals, housing and educational loans, debts, and assets would also be available to the committee. Many surveys conducted by the census include information about the sex of married and cohabitating partners. And while that is very valuable and was radical to include in those surveys in 1990, which is the year that I graduated high school, and as you can see from my hair is now many decades past, we now know that only 80% of people who are LGBT are living in cohabitating households, which means that 20%, which means that we are missing data for about 80% of the LGBT adult population by not including questions about sexual orientation, gender identity, and assigned sex at birth in these surveys. So in summary, increasing access to affordable housing will mean prohibiting discrimination in employment, housing, education, lending, and public accommodations, as well as expanding federal data collection systems designed to monitor the public well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conron.